So most of the companies, they're still chasing shareholder value alone, and optimizing. And that's kind of like the way that it works. And obviously, if this is the paradigm, and if we also, the only thing that we care about is financial profitability, then we don't care about how we're achieving. That's where it can have a negative impact on the environment, can have negative impact on the individual, because individual is just part of the machine that's generating this financial profitability, and then nature also becomes part of this machine. So we need to expand our view of what we're actually trying to achieve.
Welcome to Sustainability Transformations podcast, where we discuss bold ideas to drive positive change for people, community, and business. And today's guest is people-driven, reflective, visionary, and purpose-led Irina Alexandra is the founder of Brightroom, a social learning platform helping organizations build resilient, self-led cultures through tech-empowered, people-first education. And the key goal of our discussion is exploring, rethinking how we learn, how we lead and grow inside organizations, and thinking about work culture for a sustainable future. Thank you so much for joining us, Irina. Your story from tech executive to psychologist and Brightroom founder is powerful. What made you walk away from that corporate success to build something radically different?
Thanks so much for the intro, Enoch. And thank you for having me here. Really, really excited for this. I mean, I need to clarify, I wasn't tech executive. I didn't get that far. But also the reason why I walked away was, well, part of it was that I realized I actually don't care. I don't care about this whole climbing the ladder, getting the titles. But I was also intrinsically very competitive. So I was kind of sucked into the chase, and it just felt like a game, to be honest, because it's like I was chasing promotion after promotion. I was trying to like lead the projects the best way possible, be faster, be better, and all this kind of stuff. And there just came a point where I realized that I don't care about any of that. I don't care about the title. I don't care about higher salary. I like the company, so I don't want to say anything bad about the company where I worked, because it gave me a lot. But honestly, I didn't care about selling furniture. There was just, the moment where I realized the parts of my work that really gave me more meaning and more fulfillment was helping the people on my team grow and develop, and seeing their success, and not just like success on paper or promotions or stuff, but just seeing their personal growth was what was giving me more satisfaction. And that's when I realized that I want to step aside of corporate and try and do more of that in a larger scale, maybe, and outside of the company where I was doing it. So that's how I came into coaching, training, and then eventually entrepreneurship.
Oh, that's great. Such an interesting story about the discovery process. So you've spoken about hitting a wall with competitive burnout, which you've teased out earlier. What did success mean to you then, and how has it changed now?
Yeah. I think success back then was very much externally, like what's the best way to phrase it? It came from the external definition of success, and it came from external validation. And I think I was a bit a victim to external validation, be it by my manager, be it by just like recognition within the company. I think a lot of my identity back then was the just my life within the company, and I've experienced a bit of a identity crisis when I stepped away, and then I was just on my own and kind of no company uh, to stand behind me or in front of me, like depending how you look at it. So it was all kind of cliched success, and not something that had any intrinsic meaning to me personally. And yeah, I'm glad that I was able to reframe that.
Yeah.
Although I think it's still a process, though. I don't think that I'm fully free of the need for external validation. It's an ever ongoing process, but definitely see that now I'm much more conscious, first of all, because I wasn't even like the stuff that I'm saying right now. It's not like back then I could really articulate it for myself be aware of why am I jumping these hoops when like honestly I didn't have to, like even within the company there was no pressure for me to um do the amount of work that I was doing or with the intensity that I was doing it. It was purely my own kind of competition with myself and my need to prove whatever, something that nobody really needs proof of. Yeah, it takes awareness and it takes time and it's an ever evolving process, I think, to do like a more intrinsic and have your own validation of yourself.
That's interesting. Perhaps I want to dig deeper into the intrinsic, but perhaps before I do, one of the things that I've discovered from this podcast, talking to different experts, is uh, appreciating that sustainability transformations, where we're looking at, for example, climate change and the environment, needs to be sustained by 2050, and we need to take care of the environment. But I've learned that we need people to also be sustained. We need people to be able to survive, have a good well-being, support to be able to survive there. So in another way of describing that is the internal transformation, or the people or the person transformation, is so important. So based on that aspect, I'm curious to know, how did you go about discovering that intrinsic or the internal, whether you call it validation, or knowing your purpose, knowing your values, knowing what is important to you? Can you perhaps help share how you discovered that?
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think it all starts from the person. And I think also the reason why we're seeing so much transformation on the sustainability front, but also like in terms of how people live, run businesses, is due to the fact that people became more aware. And for me personally, that happened a little bit by accident. Although I was always very much into personal development, into psychology, I didn't really understand myself as much until I went to do my coaching certification, which, like, honestly, I didn't even know what coaching was. And it just, Facebook ad popped up. It was like, oh, like how the algorithm knows you better than you know yourself. So, and there was like, oh, we have open door event. So it looked interesting. I thought like, okay, I'm just gonna go network, see what is it. And then by the time it took place, it was actually the beginning of the pandemic. It was the kind of the first months maybe of the pandemic. And then I realized it was actually a full day event. But luckily I didn't have much to do during the pandemic. So I was like, yeah, sure, why not? So that's how I discovered coaching. And that's how I thought like, okay, why not? I'm gonna do this certificate. I was early on in my leadership journey back then. So I thought like, okay, it cannot hurt. It's gonna make me a better manager for my team. And that's, as a process of that, I learned much more about myself, about the values. It felt like I was living with my eyes shut, and now I'm just opening my eyes and I'm able to see everything so much clearer, seeing myself, seeing everything around me. So I think that's what's triggered the process, and it's been an ever ongoing process since then, just intentional self-reflection. And also with the support of other people. I think it's a little bit naive to believe that you can really do it on your own. I think you can do a lot on your own. I mean, you can read a lot of books. I mean, there's so much information available out there, but I think it does take another human to really shine light on the blind spots and hold a mirror to you, to the stuff that maybe you don't really want to see at the moment. And that's where I think also the AI is not gonna not gonna substitute, for example, therapists or coaches or the things, because it's wired to confirm what you already know in a way. I mean, like, yeah, it's giving you a lot of new information and it can reframe for you, and it's good for a lot of purposes. But this real transformation happens when you're able to look at the parts of yourself that you didn't see before. And it's an ever evolving process.
Is the education system transitioning into the corporate sector, coupled with there is a general belief about how things work? You finish in education or apprenticeships or skills trade, you go, you start working, you find out the people who get promoted career or business, this is the kind of skills that these people are exhibiting. And so there is a likelihood of just copying what others are doing, but then uh, probably 10 or 20% of the people it works, but maybe the 80% or so, I'm just coming up with some random numbers just to give. Um, but for the majority, it doesn't. And for that majority where things are not clicking, that's where perhaps I'm curious to know from your experience, do you agree that, sometimes people may just be not intentional about their actions and choices, and perhaps the coaching and other aspects is one of those intentional choices, understanding how the world really works. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on that.
Like if the question is, are people not so intentional about their choices? I think 100%. Like, it's um, I, I don't know. It's if I were to put the percentage on that, 99% of people are not intentional about their choices, and at least up until a certain point. Because I think it's very human thing. Like if you think about it, okay, we are born and we're being babies. And I think up until maybe 5 years old, I think we are in our truest, like, this is our true selves up until about 5 years old. And provided that your conditions are favorable in terms of like your family is good, like you are not in a like state of war or anything. So provided your conditions are favorable up until the age of about 5 or so, you are who you are. And that's why it's so useful to come back to remembering, okay, what did you really enjoy when you were a kid? What gave you excitement? How were you? Because it can give you a lot of clues towards what can be very fulfilling for you right now. And then we start socializing, and then we pick up a lot of things. We start seeing ourselves through the lens of other people in our lives, and we try to adapt. And it's very natural because our survival depends on our parents, first of all, and then on our social circle. So we try to gauge what's important to them and what they want to see, and we adapt based on that. So, and that's why, like, at certain point, it's really hard to say who we really are because we've been just trying to meet other people's expectations and stay safe by doing so. And then there comes a time when maybe you like fulfill those expectations, or you just notice that ultimately you're empty and everything just feels meaningless. That's definitely the feeling that I had, for example, when I was working in corporate. Everything was going pretty well, like on the outside. But then I had days when I was just laying on the couch and I didn't want to get up because I was like, what's the point? Like everything just felt so meaningless. And I think you reach that point and then you start asking yourself questions. Okay, what do I really want? Who actually am I as a person? What is the purpose of life for me personally? And it is a bit of a luxurious thing because you need to first build this foundation of safety. You need to, like, if we look at the Maslow's pyramid, you would need to have already fulfilled the basic needs, and maybe I achieved something. So you've also kind of proven yourself. You've gotten the pat on the back from your parents or whoever, and then you can start thinking, okay, then now I'm actually strong enough to go against the grain and maybe displease some of the people in my life or all people in your life, depending on what you want to do. And then you start discovering yourself. So then the process kind of is getting reversed almost, and it's a choice. It's a choice that you need to make, and it's a very painful process. And I'm saying
Yeah.
it from my experience, but also having worked, and I'm still working as a coach, and I help people to go through this experience, and so I can also observe the inner behind the scenes of this experience for other people. It's very uncomfortable. It's very painful, but also very liberating, and ultimately you can live a much more fulfilling and kind of aligned and purposeful life as a result of it.
How do modern definitions of success tend to clash with leadership and well-being, which is more sustainable?
I mean, if we're talking about, like, I'm guessing you're talking about organizational success.
Yeah, career success, what people would deem to be a successful career, what people would deem to be a successful business, what people would deem to be a successful trade that they are into,
Yeah.
and how that clashes with well-being, where the well-being is either the physical well-being, the mental health aspect, or the fulfillment that you talked about. Are there any clashes of what the society expects in 2025 along achieving those goals? I'm curious to know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there are sort of like parallels if we're thinking about it on an individual level and on organizational level. Because if we start with the individual level, yeah, the traditional kind of norm of success is go to school, get good grades, get a job, progress in your job, wear suit and tie, look important, have a family, make sure your kids are good and respectable. I don't know, get old, travel, die. Like I don't know. That's kind of the traditional pathway. I feel like we are living in an interesting time because we are at the point where it's changing. And there are more and more people, depending on where you are, 'cause there are also cultural differences there, and just yeah, even within one country, there's a lot of differences. But I feel like it is currently at this breaking point where a lot of like a significant number of people are questioning what this traditional success pathway. And the more we see that, the more other people are going to join them, because it's bound to reach a critical mass if it hasn't already. And obviously, yeah, the clash is that it's impossible that everybody on earth wants the same thing. You and I are different people. And then if we extrapolate that, everybody's different. So clearly this pathway is going to be satisfying for some people, but it's impossible that everybody wants the same thing. So then a significant number of people are sacrificing what they really want in order to fulfill this pathway of success, or they are pissing people off to pursue what they find successful, because this is the norm that we as a society kind of have created and established. And then if we look at the organizational level, I think a similar dynamic exists there, in the sense that, well, traditionally organizations were all about maximizing shareholder value, getting results with as much financial success with the most productivity, spending the least resources. That's kind of the traditional system, which again, it's changing slowly, but this way of working is still the primary way of working. So most of the companies, they're still chasing shareholder value alone, and optimizing, and that's kind of like the way that it works. And obviously, if this is the paradigm, and if we also, the only thing that we care about is financial profitability, then we don't care about how we're achieving that. And that's where it can have a negative impact on the environment, can have negative impact on the individual, because individual is just part of the machine that's generating this financial profitability, and then nature also becomes part of this machine. So we need to expand our view of what we're actually trying to achieve. And there's a lot of great literature on that, in terms of looking at uh, kind of stakeholder value rather than just shareholder value, where the stakeholders are, yes, they're still the shareholders, but it's also the employees, it's also the environment. Maybe there's something else that I'm forgetting, but definitely these three. So if we define success by how all stakeholders are feeling, I think the customer is the first one, then we will also change how we are pursuing these objectives, because then the success is more broadly defined and not so narrow. And then, yeah, sometimes maybe it means growing a bit slower. Sometimes it maybe means sacrificing some profits, but it only is a loss if you're looking at the narrow view of success being just shareholder value. But if you're looking at all stakeholders' value, then you're actually, you're actually successful by that measure, even though maybe in the short term you're making less revenue.
One area I've discovered with this shareholder and stakeholder value, it is a myth where those who think only focusing on shareholder value is the only way to succeed. You've studied and written about self-managing, the bossless organizations. How do they actually work?
Yeah. Maybe I'll start by saying how they do not work, because I feel like there are a lot of misconceptions in terms of what they are, and the typical misconceptions are, it's like, oh, it's an anarchy. There is no bosses. It means like, oh, there is chaos. There is no structure. Everybody is doing whatever they want. That's not true. That's not how they work. And yes, there are no bosses, but there is leadership. It's just the leadership is distributed and it's not held within certain people who have been assigned a title. Like that's, I mean, in the hierarchical organization, that would be that's the differentiator, like who's making the final decision, right? So it's like the big boss is the one who's taking the final shot and also is carrying the final responsibility. In self-managing organizations, this freedom and also weight of responsibility with that is distributed. So the leadership is very contextual, fluid, and it's yeah, let me leave it at that just to not overcomplicate. And basically, oftentimes people also choose their own work. So instead of somebody saying like, okay, you know, you are in the marketing department and you're gonna do this, and that, the roles are much more fluid. There might not be departments per se, and there are a lot of differences in terms of how each company operates. But it's more like circles of responsibility, and then people can choose what they do at this intersection of their personal expertise and strengths, their personal interests, and the company interests. Leadership is there. It's just not in the hands of people who have been assigned it. It's very fluid, and if even like an intern who's been who's responsible for a particular task, they are the ones who are making decisions in the end of the day. And even like if the founder is going to come to them and say like, no, this is not how you do it, they have the power to stick to their decision and also bear the responsibility of that decision later on. And it's also not unstructured. If anything, it's probably more structured than regular organizations, because for this model to work, a lot of things need to be in place. First of all, you need radical transparency, because if everybody can make decision and they need to know what's happening in the company. So that they need to have access to all the financials. They need to know the plans of the company. So you cannot hide any information. And so that needs to be in place. Obviously, there also needs to be like mechanisms for this knowledge sharing. Then you you need a way to make decisions effectively. It's not really like, I think what also people maybe misunderstand about these companies, it's not decision by consensus. So it's not like, okay, now the whole company is going to meet and we all need to agree on something. It's not like that. Like, so there are mechanisms in place where the person who is responsible for a certain task, they need to consult with people who might be affected or who might have the knowledge relevant for what they're doing, but they don't need to necessarily listen to their advice. So they can take it, but then they are the ones who are making the decision, and they can make the decision that goes against the advice as well. So immediately, first of all, you need the process for these discussions, but you also need, like, you can imagine that a lot of interpersonal dynamics show up. Because, okay, I'm supposed to ask you for advice and you give me advice, but then I choose not to listen to it. So there is a certain like personal growth that needs to happen for me to be able to, okay, I've listened to the advice and I'm now going to make my own decision and I'm going to be responsible for this decision. So there needs to be personal growth on my side, but there also needs to be personal growth on your side, to not be, not have this hurt ego and, oh, I gave her my advice, but she didn't listen to me. Yeah. So there are also these organizations, typically they have processes for tensions, and they deal with them much faster than because normal organizations normally don't have the process for this. People start to gossip. There is politics. There is like coffee, water cooler chats. There is this passive aggressive email communication where it's like, as per my last email, best regards. So in managing organizations, you can't really afford to have that. You need to have open conversations. You need to have very clear roles, clear accountability lines, very effective feedback mechanisms, and a lot of personal growth. It's also something that the research I've done, I was talking to founders of companies who either started working in that way from the get-go, or they have transitioned the company from the hierarchical structure to self-managing structure. And each one of them said that a lot of people are just not ready for the system, because it's not for everyone. Like, you need to be ready to not just enjoy the freedom that comes with that, because in such organizations nobody's telling you what to do. Like, you're doing what you think is right, and how you think is right and when. So nobody's like sitting behind your shoulder and watching you do it. And some people might think like, oh, that's what a cool organization. I want to work there. You oftentimes decide your own salary as well. So you say like, yes, I'm going to be paid that much. And it might seem like a really cool place to work in, but then when people start working there, they realize the amount of personal growth that needs to happen for this uh to uh, to actually work. A lot of people are just not ready to take the responsibility. They want to have freedom in some parts, but then when it really comes down to owning the decisions that you make and being responsible for it, not everybody's ready to do that, and not everybody's ready to receive feedback. Not everybody is ready to give feedback to others. And even with the salary, I remember one company was sharing that it's a very interesting dynamic in terms of like, okay, now you need to decide how much you're worth. You actually need to put a number on how much you think you contribute to the company. And you see also how much everybody else has contributed to the company. And now you need to decide it. It's not an easy process. And it's also not like, I wouldn't know if it's a fair process in the end of the day, because also if you account into the fact of the gender dynamics, how traditionally women and minorities in general, they like raised, well, women are raised to be humble, but then there is cultural aspect again, like in some cultures it's virtuous to be humble, and you kind of need to go against yourself to be like, okay, this is how much I worth and this is what I want you to pay me. And also like if you are an immigrant and you come into the new country, you have a different understanding of like salaries and all that. There's also potential for it not to be very fair in the end of the day. But again, there are mechanisms to then talk about it and discuss. But bottom line is that it takes a lot of personal growth on individual level, both on the employees and also on the founder who decides to operate it that way, because they do need to relinquish all of the control effectively. And they need to be okay with people making mistakes, and maybe they know that they see the mistake coming, but they need to let it happen, and they need to let people learn from that on their own. So there's a lot of growth that needs to happen there, and then there's a lot of work that needs to happen just on the system side in terms of like implementing these processes, and also continuous training, continuous learning and development, because everybody needs to know how to provide feedback, how to receive feedback, personal growth as mentioned, but then also they need to understand the business, because it's not enough to have the transparency and have the access to all of the data and figures. You also need to understand what it means. So there is this constant development that needs to happen both on the organizational and individual level.
Traditional learning and development and training has been on gatekeeping of content. It's all about sharing content before the advent of AI, where the few that had the knowledge in their mind or companies that are able to have good quality content was at the forefront. Fast forward to now, where there is no scarcity of information, there's no scarcity of content. Why do traditional learning and development models fail to inspire today's workforce?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned part of it. It's still a bit gatekeeping, and in a lot of companies, it's HR or learning and development managers who are deciding what people need, and then there's the whole process behind it, right? So they are trying to understand the learning needs. They are then aligning on that with the leadership. They are getting the budget. Then they either develop training internally or they work with external providers, which also adds like layers and layers. And then by the time that this training takes place, it's been maybe 6 months easy. Like it can take more, but 6 months easy. And now the question is it still relevant? With the with the speed of change that's happening, I would say it's gonna be useless. And no, like in general, I don't believe that learning is ever useless, but it's gonna be way less effective. And I've experienced it myself also. That's the first company that I created after leaving corporate, and on top of to my coaching, freelancing, was leadership development, because I just realized that the leadership development that it was existing at that time and still exists is just too slow. It's either okay, 1 day, 2 day, all you can eat buffet, or there is this 9 months program And the first one is just too concentrated and unrealistic to apply, because it needs to come as you do real life work and experience issues. And there needs to be this supplementation of structured learning, or there is this 9 months program, but then again, it's like by the time, like, I remember my own training, by the time I got to some training on how to handle difficult conversations, I've already had a lot of difficult conversations. Like, I've had to deal with sexual harassment conversations in my first months or weeks even of being a leader. So it needs to be readily available. And I think how it needs to change right now is more about enabling people to make their own decisions and to learn on their own terms through a variety of tools. So there's not just one thing that's better than another. It needs to be, employees need to have the access to the kind of support that they need when they need it. And that means having some libraries that they can just access on demand. It also means one-on-one support. It also means group learning, because they all have different advantages and different way that they support people. And that's ultimately how it was then shifted from pure kind of more traditional leadership development to Brightroom, because Brightroom is a subscription, but for live interactive workshops. So it's not videos on demand, but it's, I figured, I thought that there is a gap in terms of how easily people can access human-led learning. And that's how I ultimately created it, because I thought that it just needs to be much more readily available, and it needs to be people driven. It shouldn't be somebody else deciding what you need. You need to decide what you need. And also there should be an opportunity for proactivity. What I mean by that is that how learning often happens right now is that you face a challenge, and then also not immediately, but sometime later, you understand, okay, training could be a solution to this challenge. And then you kick off this process of like looking for something and whatnot. So there's this huge gap in between challenge happening and you finding out how to solve it. And I think what needs the by proactivity, I mean, is having the opportunity to be inspired, as in like seeing something that you didn't even know existed, or you didn't know you needed, but you have it available, and it piques your curiosity enough. Now you're there. So now when this challenge does come, you actually already have the tools. So I think this is where the corporate learning needs to go.
What is your final thoughts, Irina, to the audience who are listening, whether at the start of their career or they are leaders? What is your final thought?
It's something that has been coming up for me lately, is like what I'm seeing on more on the employee side, what's making me a little bit frustrated, because I mean, leaders, I don't think I'm going to say much for leaders, because they're getting a lot of shit anyways. Like everybody's giving them suggestions, what to do, how to be. And yeah, sure, there's always a lot of, they do hold a lot of responsibility, and there's always room for improvement, but there's a lot of advice out there. And I think I don't have anything fundamentally different to offer. But what's making me a little bit frustrated is that I see a lack of initiative and leadership from people, and from from the employees. Let's say people who don't hold official power, who are not in a official leadership positions. And what I see a lot is complaining, a lot of complaining, a lot of waiting for somebody to solve this, solve that, build a better workplace. And yes, that needs to happen. There's like a lot of systemic needs change that needs to happen. There's a lot of responsibility that leaders have. There's a lot of room for improvement. But then there's also, I think people underestimate the internal, the power that they have to influence the situation, and they don't take enough of responsibility on their own. And I think my message would be that the change starts with you. So it doesn't matter whether you're a leader, whether you're just joining the workforce, like whether you're 10, like it doesn't matter. There's always your circle of influence. And if you don't like something, then start by asking yourself, how can you contribute to moving, even if it's just a tiny bit, but towards your desired outcome. And so that would be my unpopular opinion and a bit of tough love.
Yeah, that's good. Huge thank you to Irina for your time, but also the incredible insights that you've shared. I feel like there is more that we can discuss, and no doubt, I'm sure we will explore some of the further topics because we've only scratched the surface of the key potential topics that we could have talked about. Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
If listeners want to find more of your work, Irina, where can they find you?
LinkedIn, I think, is the easiest way to connect with me. So find me on LinkedIn, follow Brightroom. We have exciting things coming up in the upcoming months. So, but I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn by virtue of my work. So that's probably the easiest way to find me.
I'll share Irina's links in the description, so you should be able to find it easily through there. So thanks once again.
Thanks, Tina.
Okay, that's great.